Hey guys, welcome back to the BMW Blog podcast, season 2, episode 4, and we have a very special guest today. You might have seen some of our recent articles on some secrets within BMW. So now today we have Steve Saxty, the author of BMW by Design trilogy. I guess there are 3 books, and Steve will tell us some stories from behind the scenes. Then in future episode, we're going to talk about some other books coming out from that particular 3-book set. So Steve, of course, Nate as well. Nate, welcome. Steve, welcome as well. I'm going to start with you, Steve, right away. We're just going to go right into it. Tell me more about yourself, and then also tell me more how these books came to life.
Okay, well, thank you. And hi, guys, and thanks for asking me on. I'll try and be quick. When people are asked to talk about themselves, they usually think it's the most exciting thing in the world, and I'm sure it's not. So my very quickest background is, as you can guess by the accent, I was born in the UK. I grew up loving cars because my mother loved cars. My mother is now 97 and still loves cars. She's just stopped driving, in fact. And so I grew up near Ford's R&D center. So prototypes were just going by all day long. And it left me with a bit of a fascination for the future, if you like. And you start reading the car mags as a kid, as we used to read magazines in those days. Yeah. And I thought, I want to just be a car designer. I want to be an engineer. I want to be a test driver. You want to do all these things all at once. Of course, you know, so, and luckily enough, Ford were smart enough, daft enough, I'm not sure which, to give me a sponsored training, and I became a design engineer. So I worked for Ford for a number of years, and I realized I was probably less of a designer, and perhaps less of an engineer, and more of a marketeer during that phase. And also, there was more money in marketing as well, I think. So I moved my career more in that direction. And so I moved from Ford, I went to Mazda, I went to Porsche. I thought the company cars were getting more and more fancy. And so I did that, and then moved into consulting, because what's better paid than doing it is talking about it, I discovered. And so I moved into consulting for, probably about 12 years, something like that. And that's when I moved over to the States. So I live in New York. And then perhaps on a whim, I emailed the MD of Jaguar Cars, who suggested it would be nice if I worked there, which is ridiculously arrogant, horrendous in hindsight. And he was generous enough to say, yes, come over and run the global advertising. So I went back to the UK for a while, then came back over to the US and did various other roles, including I did media for Volkswagen, and I ran global strategy for Nissan on the brand side through their agency network. So I've sort of progressively done more global roles, and it's a mix of being on the marketing and consulting side and working for the vehicle manufacturers, so Ford, Mazda, Porsche, and Jaguar. So that's my background, as quick as I can do it.
Gotcha. So let me show the books quickly, because not only they're fantastic to read, but I feel like the quality, the print and everything is just top notch. I mean, I know Hugo got a set as well, and he was raving about that. He probably has all the BMW books that came out ever, because he's a huge buff when it comes to BMW history. But yeah, the books are great. So this is BMW by Design. Basically, we're going to put some stills on the screen as well. You can see them. And I guess probably my second or my first favorite. I'm not sure, because there's so many secrets in here. Hidden BMW's hidden gems, and there are quite a few stories there. And honestly, I mean, I'm just gonna open up to show you quickly. I mean, fantastic. I'm actually still shocked that they gave you so much access and they share with you some of the secrets, and especially sketches and all of that. So maybe let's start with that, right? So how did BMW open the doors for you? Because for many years, I've been also trying to get more in there into the fits and all these secret facilities and tell me more stories, and they're always very reluctant,
Well, it's almost quite a romantic story in some ways. So my COVID project, so everybody had a COVID project, was to write a series of 2 books called Secret Fords. So I'd written some books before that on Ford. My relationship with Ford had begun to be progressively stronger and stronger over the years. And so Ford offered me all of their design sketches and prototype pictures and all that stuff. And it turned into a very popular series of books. That's all great. And one of them was Book of the Year finalist. So I had a little bit of a reputation in that space. And what I didn't know was Adrian Van Hooydonk. I'm sure most people are familiar with the name, but Adrian Van Hooydonk, the BMW Group chief designer, bought the books. And so he also has in common somebody I know that, again, some people might know the name of Harm Lagai, who was formerly the chief designer of Porsche. But Harm is also, how I know him, formerly a designer at Ford. He's also Dutch, same as Adrian. What I didn't know is Adrian and Harm are friends, properly friends, not acquaintances. And so, all of this is going on behind the scenes, of course. Adrian's been buying my books, Harm and he got chatting. And so one morning, and I remember it well because it was heavy snow outside. You couldn't leave the house. It was brutally cold day. And Harm just rings me up. And he said, I've only got 20 minutes. I've got a pizza in the oven. I'm thinking, okay, why is the former chief designer of Porsche ringing me up? He's not asking for cooking tips. And so it's chatting away. I'm thinking, there must be a reason. He can't be ringing me up on Sunday morning for a chat. And he said, I've got an idea for a book. Now, remember, I used to work for Porsche. I used to work for Ford. I've done the Ford books. I'm expecting him to say, you should do a book on Porsche. And the world is full of Porsche books. No. And he said, you should do a book on BMW. I said, well, that's amazing. I think Adrian may have bought my book even. I thought I saw his name on the list one day. He said, yes, he's bought your books. We had lunch the other day. And he's very keen for you to talk. I said, really? And he said, you need to write him a letter. Now, we're all young enough to be the sort of era of email. You don't write letters. I mean, I said, write him a letter. And he said, yeah, no, at his level, you have to write him a letter. And I was like, okay, I'll write him a letter. Now, remember, it's snowing outside, so I typed out the letter, and I thought, I'll post it inside our building. I won't even leave the house. And I thought, this is never going to get to Munich. This is never going to find its way through the internal mailbox in our apartments in Manhattan out to Adrian's desk. It's never going to happen. So about 6 weeks later, I got an email back, and it was a letter in a PDF that had been scanned in, emailed back to me from Adrian. And it was a nice letter. So I'm sorry it's taken me so long. I wanted to think about your letter, exclamation mark. But if you'd like to talk, I've got this idea for a book that might be different and potentially quite interesting. I'd be happy to chat via video if you're interested. And I thought, now, I don't expect Adrian to straight away get on video, but as I've discovered and become progressively more friendly with Adrian, he's happy to chat. And I've spent a lot of time, a lot of dinners, and lots of chats with Adrian over the years. But I liked it straight out the gate. And when we got talking, the first thing he did was to tease me, why did I write a letter? And I thought, well, okay, good. So really it's his idea more than mine to write the book. And his suggestion was to write the design history of BMW through the lens of its concept cars. And I'll be honest with you, I was a bit skeptical. And the reason being is the Secret Ford books that I did, the 2 volumes of that, was through the lens of all the concepts that are designed along the way to get to a production car. So it's the story of the production cars with all the bits that fall off along the way. And I thought that was a really nice way of telling a story. But the problem is of course, car makers make so many more cars than they ever used to. So if you look to BMW's range through most of its history, it's been 3, 5, 7, and a coupe. Whereas Ford would probably have had like 5 in Europe, when obviously the US is much higher. So, but the problem is of course, in the last 20 years, the range has expanded so much. You couldn't tell the story of every BMW as a design story. It would just be like 20 volumes thick, and it would be too much to read. So Adrian's idea was to do it through the concept cars. I was like, yeah, but are people really kind of interested in those one-off bits of show stuff? And he said, no. These cars are so important to us. They are absolutely the most prestigious things to do. To design a concept car is a real career-making thing for the designers, and it really influences BMW. And I thought, does it really? They're not just put on the show stand to get people to come on and buy a 3 Series. He said, no. They really do dramatically influence the company. I have to tell you, Steve, it is the most important thing we do here sometimes is the concepts, because they really are so important to our future. And I was like, crikey, well, that's different. And it's, somebody who's worked in the industry like me all this time, I'm unused to hearing somebody be so passionate that it's such an important insight into their future. So that's how it started, basically.
Gotcha. So what was the next step? Did you go to Munich? Did you have a chance to go behind the scenes?
Well, first step was, of course, we were still in the throes of COVID, and I had to finish the Secret Fords book. So I sort of had to wait pretty much through the roughly about 8 months to 12 months before I could even start. I was so busy. So it was one of those things where I felt really bad that I'd been given this gift to talk to Adrian to come over. And I, partly because of COVID, partly because of just the work finishing the other books. So I did go over, and I had my first introduction was dinner with Hamler Guy and Adrian. And Adrian is probably the tallest human in the world. I mean, you know, I'm 6'1". I don't know how tall he is. He's about 6'6" or so. I think he towers at me. And so you can't fail to miss Adrian. So he walks in, and we had dinner at the Munich Drivers Club, which is this lovely place just outside where their headquarters at the FIT are. Beautiful place to sort of see lots of lovely cars. It's a very nice, elegant environment. And so we had this really quite fun dinner. And I thought, okay, he's so busy. I said, well, do you still need to meet tomorrow, Adrian? Because I could just imagine how busy a guy like that is. It had been a great dinner, you know, going for 3 hours. And he said, oh, no, we have lots to talk about. No, we absolutely need to talk tomorrow. I said, okay. I didn't realize that you're still going to find time for little old me. And so we sat there for, I think it was another hour and a half or something like that in his office the next day. And we really fleshed out the idea for the book. And it was at that point he did two things, actually. He made the commitment that I'd be able to talk to anybody. And if there's one thing I can only impress upon, I hope, or actually, now you've seen it, you'd agree, is I was never filtered. That book is truly me being able to wander inside the company and talk to everybody. Yeah. And Adrian made that commitment, which I think is so impressive, that he trusted me and I trusted him in return, that we would absolutely go in and let me just talk to them as an insider. And what a gift that was, to just wander the place and talk to everybody.
Gotcha. So were you a BMW aficionado before, or this was a process for you also to learn about the company and about its history as well?
A bit of both. So my wife and I, we drive BMWs. So we do actually own BMWs. My Ford fans might assume that I only drive Fords, but I do have a classic Ford as well, don't worry. So we do drive BMWs. And I also have some experience with BMW, both socially and professionally. I worked with BMW in my consulting days on the Rolls-Royce project and what to do with Rover as well, when they were trying to figure out whether to dispose of Rover. And I used to also date a girl that was there as well. So I have a background going into Munich professionally and personally over the years, and that now I've discovered they're so into all of that stuff. So they love that I had a little bit of a story with them. And if I'm honest with you, I'm not going to say I am the world's biggest BMW fan, but that actually makes me objective. So there is an element where, goodness me, I mean, I've become almost an expert after 2.5 years, I might feel, but there's something you only get from living the brand for 20 years, like some people obviously do. But what I can say is I've learned this company from the inside in a way that is an unbelievable gift. You know, I mean, I feel that's the gift I can give is not so much an expert opinion, but a learned opinion, because of course I've worked in other car companies as well. So I've got comparison.
Gotcha.
So that's my hope, I think, to readers.
Was there I was just going to say, so when you got into talking with Adrian, and was there a time period that you're looking to focus on, or was it more of like across the whole history of BMW concepts?
Well, the fact that there are now 3 books tells you exactly one book, right? So the original plan was to, as I mentioned, cover it through the concept car. But what I realized is, unless you explain the story through the 70s, 80s, and 90s, you're going to lose part of the audience, which is obviously the people that love the classics. But also, if you just start the story, nobody knows what happened before. So even people that love and know the modern product, you've got to know the backstory. So I realized early on that I needed to go right back to the beginning and tell the story. And again, you'll have to trust me, and hopefully Rachel agrees. The first 3 chapters are almost flying at 30,000 feet before we drive or dive down into a low-level pass into the technical future.
And that's a very good point, because there's a lot of new people to the brand. Obviously, like the M brand is huge now. That they're doing record sales all the times, and there's a lot of people who don't know some of that history and those concepts that led to products that are out there today. I love seeing those things like the original X5 that had the M5 engine in it that they did, the V10. That was just cool stuff, which led to X5M products. So right. It's kind of you need that history to get where we are today.
Yeah, totally. Because otherwise, if you're an enthusiast and you don't like SUVs, or if you like modern cars and you don't understand the history, you need everybody to be a little bit on the same page. So that's what I wanted to do, really. And also it's fun for me. It's the way I learn, because I now know the history through and through. So I sort of wrote it from the post-war period on, because nobody really wants to go right back into the 20s and 30s. I get that.
It's a lot of motorcycles.
There are others. But from sort of the 70s and the Paul Bracq era, because that's such a rich vein of creativity, and that's what shaped the company today, that's where the story really gets going, 70s and 80s, I think.
Gotcha. So enough teasing. I guess we've teased the content quite a bit, and you mentioned a little bit earlier the Range Rover story. So should we talk a little about that? You don't have to give away the entire story, but maybe enough to make the audience understand what happened behind the scenes.
Sure. Well, one of the fascinating things I got, I'll give something away along the way, is that BMW were looking at buying Porsche. How different those two companies' history would be if BMW had bought Porsche as planned. But instead, they bought Rover Group, which included Land Rover, included Mini. And the reality is the Range Rover needed replacing. Wolfgang Reitzler, a name that many will know that knows BMW history, the head of R&D, was very passionate about Land Rover and Range Rover within it, and really wanted to make this the finest SUV. It was completely separate to X5. There was never any sharing of designers. It was. And the original models were designed out in the UK. But the truth of the matter is to get the engineering standards up to BMW standard, they engineered the car and finished the design completely inside Germany. And so I thought it was a really cool story. In a compact space, as I brought all the designers together. And so I had them all in the chat one day. And so actually, they'd never been reunited for decades, some of these people. So it was a fascinating mix. And one of the things that, again, has never been told is Ian Cameron, who oversaw it, was a BMW designer, but he's British. So there was a BMW designer overseeing it alongside the Brits, even though he was British. So it's a real mix of people, but it's very much a German engineered, and the final design was done all in Germany. So it's kind of a cool story, I think. There you go. I gave a lot of it away there, but I think it's a cool story.
Now, for those who don't know, do we know which model was that of the Range Rover?
Well, it has two names. So if you speak to Range Rover and Land Rover enthusiasts, it's an L320. But inside BMW, it's L30. That shows you how disconnected things were. Is they had two different code names, one at Rover and one at BMW. So yeah, it's L320 to Land Rover people, L30 to BMW people. It's the original Range Rover from 20 years ago, the third generation car.
Gotcha. Okay. Now, if you were to pick the most interesting chapter out of BMW by Design book, which one would it be? Or which one is your favorite? Maybe? That's very
You're asking me to name my favorite children.
I was just going to say the same thing.
What's my favorite chapter? It's the chapter I didn't expect it to be remotely interesting, because I didn't understand the car, and that's the BMW Next 100, which is the gold concept car from whatever it would be, 2006, 2007. It's easily the most influential concept car they've ever made. And it's changed the face of BMW and its future. So the influence on Neue Class, that's to come, and the influence on the BMW mindset was huge from that car. So it's a massively important car. And if I'm honest with you, I didn't realize how influential and how important that car was. And when you see that chapter, which is, I think it's about the 10th or 11th chapter, it is a beautiful car in its own right. Mm-hmm. And the thinking behind it and the engineering on it was so unusual. And also the coolest bit is I think that's what the chapter's titled, it's the most expensive BMW ever made, because it was just so much in it. So I think that BMW Next 100 Gold concept car, I love that chapter because I learned so much. I really did. If there's one chapter that encapsulates BMW in how it thinks, it's possibly that chapter.
And I think that's, I mean, a lot of people know it was actually the anniversary car for BMW for 100 years. They did, I guess, a BMW, a Rolls-Royce, and a Motorrad. Actually, there were 4 concepts. But yeah, this one. And clearly you can see some influences from that concept into also Neue Klasse, but also some other cars as well, especially on the digital side. But is there something that you've learned behind the scenes about that car? Was there something challenging or something more interesting about that project, and maybe what you put in the book?
Yeah. Well, I hopefully I tried to put it all in the book that was interesting, but I think one of the fascinating things about it is it works. What I mean by it works is it's got these fully enclosed wheels. Mm-hmm. And what I didn't realize was I thought it was all CGI and make-believe. And what I realized is BMW can't help itself. It properly engineered it. So there's fully covered wheels and everything turns and moves and articulates with the suspension. It's really cool.
I was going to say, didn't the Next 100 also kind of morph its body a little bit?
A little bit with the wheels. So it changes shape.
So it get wider and things like that.
It's a bit like, if you look at crocodile skin, the way it cracks and opens, it's got that sort of movement within the joints. So it's almost alive. And it's a bit of a cliche, I think, in the car industry to talk about cars being alive, but that car almost is alive. And I sat with it, and it has real presence. And when you're with that car, it does feel from another world. It's a very cool car. I didn't realize how cool it was.
Yeah, that shows the influence of BMW Gina concept, right? I mean, that car also had a huge influence on BMW, and I guess some of the materials and all of that, they're clearly inspired by Gina, I guess.
Well, I think that's one of the coolest pictures you reminded me there, actually. I was showing in the book. There is a picture of the car being built, Vision Next 100. In the background, off to one side, is the Gina concept car with the fabric skin. And it was there just as inspiration for them that they've done this before. And they've really pushed the boundaries. And the Gina concept with its fabric skin is probably one of the most brain-stretching vehicles that they've ever done. So Gina's another really cool story, I think, as well, because it influenced their production cars, as you saw in one of the pages there, where they actually looked at using this fabric skin to influence the design.
Gina's really cool. I think it still holds a lot of cool concepts today. Like, even if you see it today, you're like, whoa, who even thinks of that? Things like the fabric, like the Superman spreading to see the engine, and the blinking of the headlights for the eyes and things like that. Just like the whole idea around it was just so far ahead, I feel.
Well, and that's the thing that they sometimes say internally, we need to think like Gina. And so it leaves its legacy today inside the company that they were able to scramble their brains. Because for those of us on the outside, I think we all imagine fabric, skin, whatever. But actually, there's a lot about that that's really interesting because lights can shine through it. It can change shape. It's very light. There's no tooling costs. So there's so much in Gina by not using metal, but using fabric, that's really different and radical in its thinking. And I've got the photos, I didn't put them in the book, but they had sort of Gina generators that could pull and twist shapes and things like that. And some of that Gina thinking went through onto the original Z4 on the trunk as that pushed up rear end. That's Gina inspired. And on the M3, I think it's somebody's going to correct me here, E46 M3, the hood is stitched with little, as if it's metal, it's fabric, so it pulls the metal into it. So it did change the way they think of it. So it's a very cool car, because I've got pictures now that show they were even thinking of using its influence for the E93 coupe, which, how cool is that? Well, but behind the scenes, it really was being used.
Yeah, exactly. So speaking of Gina, I mean, clearly that was a Chris Bangle project. How was that experience talking to Bangle? I had a chance to talk to him a few times in the past, but I haven't seen him in a while now. Was he upfront about things? Was he open talking to you? Same thing with Karim Habib.
Both Chris and Karim Habib, they were really generous with their time, and I mean, to the extent probably we've spoken, Chris and I, maybe 6-8 hours we've been speaking over different occasions. You get exhausted if you spoke to his kids for 8 hours. What's interesting with Chris is he's so full of ideas, and how his mind thinks is so fast. But what a sensitive man he is in terms of he's sensitive to his people. He's very generous. I found him absolutely fascinating to talk to, I must be honest, actually. I love the fact that he contributed so much to that. There's one chapter in the book, which is, I try not to make chapters about people. I think the people are so important to the story, but I think people want to read about an era. And so there is one chapter, though, that is very much Chris Bangle's era, and it was wonderful to get so much insight from him. So he was terrific.
Gotcha. And what about Karim?
Karim was similarly, I mean, you have to appreciate Chris is not so much retired, but he's not an active frontline design boss. But Karim is obviously now the current head of design for Kia. And I was amazed how enthusiastic he was to talk. I mean, Karim sort of was so much a part of that place for so long. And again, very generous with his time, and I thought very honest, and quite comfortable praising BMW and what it's good at. Remember, usually you've got a PR person saying, well, don't praise the competition, this is the head of design shit. But Karim had a sense that this book was history, and this was for him to be in his place in history within that company. So I'll give him full credit for that. As the head of the global head of Kia design, absolutely Kia do some fantastic stuff now. Still really comfortable and really enthusiastic to help on the BMW book. So full marks to him on that.
Understood. I have to mention probably Domagoj, because Domagoj, I mean, he's kind of the face of BMW right now. He's pushing the company forward in many different ways. Some would say his designs are controversial, but I guess sales prove that they're selling. So once again, styling design could be subjective sometimes. But how was the experience talking to Domagoj? Because I absolutely know him really, really well. So I'm trying to see, or I'm trying to understand what's his vision for the company, or something that maybe you've learned that you put in the books as well, because I've seen a lot of Domagoj's quotes in the book.
Yeah, well, Domagoj, again, generous with his time. I mean, he's busy. Goodness me, he's busy. I mean, I would say that. And Domagoj is very honest. I mean, to the point where I think there's an openness and honesty to him that probably would surprise people if I'm playing. And one of the things that he did, which I think was probably so honest that it's probably a surprise to readers, and you'll have seen it there, Rachel, in the book, is why it was time to change. So he's quite comfortable talking about why they'll change in the future. And I liked him for that honesty and openness, because people never usually talk about the future quite so openly, but he did. But similarly, I challenged him. I challenged him on XM. I said, okay, you sold me an XM. You know it's a controversial car. Sell me the story of XM and why I should ever consider buying one. And if you convince me that the story is interesting enough, it will go in the book. And it doesn't necessarily make me buy one, but it would make me point out why it's there and the backstory behind it. And I think to get that story from the man who pushed that car along with Jose Casas, it's terrific that we've got those backstories from Domagoj.
Gotcha. So I was going to leave that story last, but I guess now that you mentioned that, we have to tease that a little bit. So it's part of the second book, Hidden Gems. And I just wrote, a short story based on your book, on that project, and how initially the halo car for the M brand was supposed to be this secret project called i16, something I've heard about, even before I read the book. I knew there was approved and ready to go, and then I guess a lot of things happened behind the scenes. But tell me more about that. I mean, if people don't know, i16, it was this successor of the BMW i8. It was based on the Vision M Next, a car that I've seen personally a few times, and I thought it was fantastic. What can you tell us about that project? What have you learned? And why was it canceled? Because the book, it's a little bit vague on
that. Okay, you're pushing me there. So I16 is actually in the main book.
Is it in the main book? Okay,
yeah,
it's in the other one.
No, it's in the main book.
Apologize.
And just to recap for those that don't know, because I haven't yet read the book. So i16 was essentially what would have been, I wouldn't say BMW's next M1, but very close to being what would be BMW's next M1. Now, the thing you have to remember is BMW has done new M1s rather, for decades. I have got so many BMW M1s that never were. It's almost a book in itself. I've got the 90s BMW M1. I've got the 2000. There's a point where there's a lot of BMW M1s. And one of the most senior people on Adrian's team, Werner Almeyer, said, there's somebody designing a BMW M1 every day behind the scenes, so under their desk. It's just what everybody does. And the reality is, they came up with a very clever idea, which is to use some of the i8 structure and to evolve it with a 4-cylinder engine. And I think it's 534 horsepower. I'd have to check, but it's around that sort of number. And it would be essentially the M Next as a production car. What wasn't known was it was about 95% finished because it's never been publicly announced. And it's a terrific looking thing. I mean, I've got the pictures that are in there plus a few others, and it's a terrific looking car. Why was it cancelled? Well, the honest truth is volume. It's like all these things. As somebody said to me, it's easy to find 100,000 enthusiasts on the internet that will tell you BMW should make the car, but try and find 20,000 customers that will buy it isn't so easy. And at the end of the day, they can't just make a car to lose money. And the i8 just scraped in with that 20,000 unit volume. And I can't claim I know the profitability of i8 in any detail, but it was clearly a halo car. But there's only so much you can do when no board, no shareholder, no owner should really want BMW just to make a car at a loss. That's just not a good idea. And then you've got a situation where in the market at the moment, we may have a lot of hybrid technology in place, but that high end of the supercar market, and I mean a step above where i8 was, people have got 10, 12, 8 cylinders at the least, and it's kind of tough being in that market, even if you've got the power. You take my point. So it is a powertrain savvy market. Now it's all going to change with electric, clearly, but that's another story.
Yes, I'm hoping that you pushed back on that a little bit, because I mean it's the same story I've heard a million times from them. It's a very political correct answer, and that's fair from them also. But I counterpoint that all the time when I talk to them. I'm like, okay, I get it. It's all about the business case and if it makes sense and all of that. But there's so many other products in the market that have done great for brands to elevate their marketing status, or even the brand, like Audi R8, right? I'm not even going to go to other brands. We talk about that. The car they've lost money on was not even that great of a drive in certain configurations, but it did well for Audi. And I guess BMW didn't need that for a while. I guess it was not needed. But it came to a point where I feel like the Halo car, it's needed. And mostly I blame this on social media, how information spreads today, because those type of products today, they can elevate the brand a lot faster than before, just through social media. Mm-hmm. Like before, it was maybe just a few car magazines here and there. But now you put a good product out, it just spreads like fire. It actually influences people to buy other cars within the brand. So I'm truly hoping that maybe you asked, or you went back to them and say, hey, how about this?
Well, I'll answer your point in two ways. Firstly, social media can kill a car as well as make a car. And so, I've seen people say, one other thing, they can't possibly cut it with 500 horsepower. I'm like, last time I drove a 500 horsepower car, I nearly killed myself. I don't need 400 horsepower. Who needs, but the point would be in the world of social media is if people are talking about 1,000 horsepower cars, well, you don't need a 1,000 horsepower car. You don't need a 500 horsepower car. But the reality is it's a bit of a game of numbers. So there's that element to it. But also from BMW's perspective is they are massively keen to do halo cars. I mean, I don't think it's any great secret with the 3.0 CSL that was an instant style at 750,000 euros plus tax. And then you've got what would have been an opportunity with the Z3 Touring Coupe that was last year's concept car. We'll wait and see what is this year's concept car, dare I say. But there's no doubt that they would love to do something more. And, watch this space. There's an opportunity or two that might answer a few people's questions there this year.
Yeah, the word on the street is they're actively, currently, as of last month, trying to push another one through. So I don't know. I've heard some mixed stories about that, but I'll save that for an article.
There's always somebody designing an M1. That's all I'll say.
I don't want to give it away yet, but I've heard some stories about that. Okay. I don't want to take over the whole chat. So Nate, if you want to jump in, feel free.
Yeah, no. Is there? I know you talked about the next 100, but being kind of that highlight one that kind of surprised you. But was there anything that kind of cemented as your favorite in there, or grew as being like that was something that you enjoyed covering the most?
Yeah, a car I never had any love for whatsoever, which is the E31 8 when you dive into the book, I mean, I try and stay on focus as an author, but occasionally you have to you have to stroke the children you know most. And it was it's such an unloved car, and it's the anti-hero, right? Great looking car,
beautiful,
disaster in the market. And I managed to get all these designer sketches of the versions of it that didn't come out and the backstories behind it. And I thought, I began to fall for that car. And of course, I do this all the time, as I'm sure all of you just like, should I go and buy one? And I was like, well, they're quite cheap. And then next week I move on to a 1N coupe. And I think, no. And then it was a Z8. And I thought, just stop. There's a little bit where I do this like everybody else. And I thought, it's kind of cool, that thing, And so I thought that was a really interesting story, is how the E31 8 Series had what I would call scope creep, as we call it in the trade, is it became so BMW in the vision of Wolfgang Reitzer at the time that it was actually not the right car. And what the market wanted was an affordable 6 and 8 cylinder car, which was what we got in the US market with the Lexus SC300. Which absolutely hit the market, right time, right price point, sold. It outsold the 8 Series, I think, 10-1, and yet it was in the same category of a luxury coupe. So I think that's a really interesting story, because I've got them in the book, the early design sketches, and they were beautiful. I mean, just absolutely beautiful. But it came this very bombastic, high-speed Autobahn cruiser with 6 suspension, with a huge V12 engine, and that's not what the California and the Floridian market is about. So I think that's an interesting story.
And it's a design, I think, that's really held up really well, too. Like you're saying, It's a beautiful car. I think so, too, today. I think when people, even non-BMW enthusiasts, see that, they don't think of how old that car actually is.
Totally. And its designer, Klaus Kapitza, was a long-time Ford designer. And so I was able, for those that read my Ford books, track, because most of BMW's design team in the 80s was Ford's design team. So the Sierra, for those of you on Mecca and Mecca or GI in this market, the Sierra design team actually moved en masse from Ford. And they were really some of the most talented designers of the era. So they moved across to BMW, and they went on to stellar careers, running design Aston, Porsche, all Alfa Romeo. There's a lot of these people And so BMW was very lucky in the 80s to pick up, that design team and bed them in. So I think that's also a cool part of the story as well.
Gotcha. So you mentioned earlier that you were a designer before, and now going back into design studios at BMW and Ford, what can you tell us how things have changed when it comes to actually designing a car, penning a car, but also maybe some of the differences in between a design process at Ford versus the one at BMW?
Okay, that's a good question. Well, first I was a design engineer rather than designer, so don't let me try and draw a car. It's never going to work out well, but I do see the language.
The same world.
Yeah, exactly. I come from that world, and so I spent a lot of my time in design studios. Well, the first thing to remember is obviously how it changes across the industry. And so when I was a young lad starting in it, all the studios were like the desks around the edge, and there's the clay models in the middle, and the whole place would smell of this special clay called shrouded clay. And the air was damp because of the clay was drying. It was always very damp in the studio. And the other thing you could always smell was the clay and the marker pens. And you always sort of, there's those smell of the marker pens that sort of get you high or whatever it is. And so there was a very distinct feel in the studios. And I think most people's imagination considers that's what a design studio is like today. And so the BMW studio is not like that, as the other studios, because people are using computers. So they're staring at a giant screen, they're at a desk, and they do still make clay models, but they also do a lot of digital models and foam models, and I'll mention that. I'll come back in a moment. But if you think of the BMW studio, whereas in days gone by, you'd walk around and there'd be all the clay models and you'd see the cars in the future. Now they're all draped. So they only uncover them when they need to. So, and that's because everybody's walking around with an iPhone. And how do you stop? When I worked for Jaguar, we used to have a little sticker that you put over your phone. Ford did too, and I visited the Ford studio some years ago. They put a little Ford sticker or Jaguar sticker over your phone lens. But of course, people will sneak in with another phone. So what they do is they cover all the models so that you don't sort of see the unless you're actually looking at it and shown it. But also the designers are just sort of sitting off on different floors or whatever because they're just using their Wacom tablets and whatever, and they're on Photoshop, they're drawing away. So it's not as glamorous looking as it used to be, for honest with you. So somebody can be doing a spreadsheet or designing a car. You have to look what's on the screen, So very much it's changed.
Gotcha.
And the other thing I mentioned there, and I should come back to, is the phone models. So they do still use models, but one of the things they do now is, and again, it's in the book when they started using it on the BMW Hommage, is they mill the model quickly out of foam in three-dimensional axis. So you can get to a model really quickly. Rather than making it out of clay, you can just mill the foam into shape and get so it's very dense foam. It's not like the package one you get, very dense foam. So you can just mill it in probably a couple of hours. I think they can do it now. And so you can look at it that way. So the industry has changed beyond compare. I mean, I'll give you a case in point for it's not BMW, but another manufacturer. They now have apps on their phones. They will 3D scan a car. And I know of one car company, not BMW, that actually goes off and builds its competitors' cars and makes them into 3D models for clinics. So they actually clinic test their competitors' cars. Again, it's not BMW, but I think it's so amazing that that's the future we live in now. So digital has transformed it, obviously.
Yeah, and speaking of digital and like the transformation from previous years to now is the hyper focus on interior and comfort as well. Which is something that I don't know if you covered in your book, but in the past it was all about driver focus, and now it's all about comfort and tech and stuff like that. So how has and that's very much a huge focus with like the Neue class. It's all that new tech focus. Do we go through any of that through any of your
totally.
book?
Yeah. So with Neue class, it's very much the final chapter because it's the car of the future. And so I talk extensively about how they were inspired with the head-up panoramic display. So I think to get an insight into what's to come, I think that chapter is amazing because you really get to understand the genesis of the car and the production car that will follow. And So on that level, the future tech in it, that's covered really well. That's probably one of the chapters I'm most proud of, because I didn't expect to go so far into the future. I mean, it really does go a lot deeper and a lot more genuine without sort of PR massaging. It's very much into the future. But you asked about the history of design. So that's in the second book, Hidden Gems, where I cover the history of interior design, because it's a really good point. I did not want this book to be just about superficial styling, and the design is so much deeper. And so I think it's probably two of the most difficult chapters to write was that one about the history of interior design, where I talked to the designers. So this is the other thing, is I interviewed 120 people for these books, which is like the Walter Isaac biography on Steve Jobs is that level of interviews you're doing. And it's exhausting to talk to 120 people. Fun as they are, it's a lot of conversation. And
I don't even want to talk to 20 people, so.
But to talk to them, I got them to narrate their own sketches. So where possible, I have a designer narrate their work. So I think it's a wonderful opportunity that I don't think a book has ever been done like that, where you're just sitting with a designer and they're talking to you about how they design it. So for an interior design, the second book in the 3-book set, BMW Hidden Gems, you see the evolution of interior design with the sketches, and they talk through how things changed. And I'd love to do a book on interior design someday. I thought it was so cool. I want to see if people like that chapter, because that was one I was determined to do, was the history of interior, BMW interior design.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that people just don't notice. I mean, I remember when I was, just getting into driving in BMW, is like the one thing I loved about BMW when I first started was every time I got into one, they all felt very similar, right? Like buttons in the same place, is all driver focused and all very much geared to be very efficient for the driver. And then I think what really opened my eyes is when I test drove the i3. And then just like completely different world, very minimalist and clean and airy. And I just like, I could feel how that design was like totally geared for people who are probably going to be sitting in traffic and things like that and coming out of work. And it just was completely like night and day difference, and how much I really enjoyed the polar opposites of that, and just how the driving experience changed because of that as well.
Well, it's good that you mention it, because the i3 and the i8 are extensively in the interior design story, because the designers that did that so proud of their work, so proud of it even now. And it was almost like a boot camp off-site where those two vehicles were designed, and it was so different. And they all admit to me they felt they were in competition with each other, like no other design, because they were trying to redefine what an interior could be, and all that eucalyptus wood and all that cool stuff. I completely agree with you. I mean, i3, just an amazing piece of interior design, and so different.
Yeah, it was so far thinking that actually now if you sit in like a Tesla Model 3, you can totally tell they took a lot of those very clean lines, very, that modern look. It's very, very similar to that original i3. And that's what a lot of people today love about that Tesla. Like, it's so clean and it's so airy. And it's like, it shows you how far ahead BMW is thinking and pushing their envelope already.
Yeah, totally. And that's what I tried to do in the book, is these seminal, what I would call, it's a German phrase, of lighthouse interiors. So they do, and the other one that I think one of the coolest sketches in there is the BMW E25 Turbo interior, which is all this fiery orange. And the amazing thing that I didn't know, I don't think it's widely known, it was supposed to be intended for production. And so I looked at the sketches and I realized why. It's actually got a cigarette lighter and everything. No concept car has a cigarette lighter in there. It was always intended as a production car. So that was kind of cool. And the other end of the story is the G67 series, where talking to the designers there about how they got into Cashmere. I think you covered it on the blog, didn't you, Rashid, the other day?
Yeah.
It's a really cool story of why they used Cashmere. And they rediscovered that horseless carriages used cloth in the inside, and it was the guy sitting on the outside whipping the horses that sat on the leather seat to protect from the rain. And it was all about opulence of Cashmere and how they rediscovered that. And that gave them inspiration with the G60, which was almost, what if BMW did it on Rolls-Royce, but was competing with a Bentley, which is a lower priced car too. And I was talking to BMW Park Lane just a couple of days ago, and the buyers of these cars are like billionaires. It's amazing how wealthy some of these buyers are at that end of the market. So what they're wanting is subtlety and taste and that opulence of cashmere. So I thought that was a really interesting interior design story of just what people are buying, why they're buying that stuff.
It is. Did they tell you? I mean, when I wrote the story, I've talked about Cashmere when the car came out and all of that, and clearly durability. It's a big thing when it comes to that type of materials. And I tried to find that in the book, but I guess it was just brief on that. Did they tell you more about that, like how they approach durability compared to leather?
I can go back into my notes, but I remember that it was a lot of durability testing. I mean, it was one of those things where it was little touch and go, I think, in terms of was there an expectation of durability testing, but it's done it. But the issue is there's durability of wear, there's durability of fingerprints. And, I mean, if you put chocolate on cashmere, you'll ruin it. I mean, there's nothing you can do about that, clearly. But that's the same for any fabric, in truth. So, but yeah, it's one of those things where they really push hard to do it. But unless the customer knows that story, I don't know that they'd understand why they would just not choose default black leather, which is sadly what so many people do.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm going to ask one more question about all the concepts and prototypes that you've seen. So clearly you've seen sketches, you've seen clay models, you've seen probably production-ready cars as well in their studios. Was there a particular car which you personally wished it was made? And I'm going to start with my preference, out of the concepts that I've seen over the years, the BMW 2002 Turbo,
the Turbo Hommage,
I mean the Homage, the Jägermeister one, or the silver one. I mean, I felt like that was such a good concept car. That was paying homage to the brand in a proper way. It was a proper successor to the 2002. It was exactly what the brand kind of stood for, and hopefully still stands for. But I'm curious, what's your favorite out of all of them?
Well, before I started the book, it would have been the 3.0 Seattle Hommage, but then they started giving me nudges. Don't worry, it's coming, and I'm thinking they're never going to take that after all this time. And then they just wait a few months. Damn it, they are making it. So I would share with you the homage thing. The thing is, though, the problem is I get so close to these people, and I say exactly what I would agree with you, really, that I thought 2002 homage was one of them. But it was such an inspiration for the M2 that Ian Robertson, who's the board member for sales and marketing, said, yeah, but Steve, time passed it by. It would have come out very late in the cycle, because for those that haven't read the book, I'll give a bit away, which is that car was intended to be made in production. So that was the big surprise. That this is why these concepts are more important than people realize. The idea was to do a limited run of those 2002 homages based on what was the first generation M2. But it really put a lot of inspiration into the current M2 with its wide arch stance and everything, which again, I know current M2 is, somewhat boundary pushing again, I get that. But it takes a lot of that mindset, if you like, from that car. And that's the thing, is that's their job as much as anything, is to inspire what's to follow. And yet we can't see on the outside so much. So there's a little bit of it did happen in some ways. And when you look at them side by side, I kind of get it, really, that there's a lot of M2 does lean into 2002 homage. But I tell you the one car I do wish that they'd made, because the designers and engineers are so passionate about it now, and that's it. We should come back to it when we discuss the Hidden Gems book, is the 2K2, the 2002 that they nearly brought back in the 90s, because it's such a cool story, I think. That so that's probably my favorite, I think.
So a little bit of background on that we're still waiting to run that story. I guess that's an interesting story that we're going to run soon, and then you can give a little bit of insight, and then you can see it in the book. But yeah, that's a fascinating story. Back to the 2002, I agree. I guess that's what concepts are, to inspire other products. But that car, even if you look today, whatever, 8 years later, is still ready for production. You can put that in production today. It was almost production ready based on the design that I saw. And if the i16 and all these products were not really sharing a lot of the platforms with other products, when it comes to something like that, it was clearly based on Clar. They could have shared that. The cost would have been lower. And once again, that might might have been even a better halo car than the i16, in my opinion, honestly, now that if I go back, because it just speaks to the true enthusiasts of the brand.
The halo cars have to be CSL 2002 and M1, and they revisited each of them as homage cars. One of them did get made, finally, with the 3.0 CSL. But the good news is they've learned from that. They got one made. They got 50 of them made. They got 50 in production. And if I ever get around to doing the 3.0 CSL story, which I'm tempted to do that another book another time, that's a really cool story, how that car came to be. And that's, I'm sorry to say, not in the book, but I think that's a really cool car because it was somebody else's influence on BMW that suggested a way of making that car. It's finding a way to get through the system. And they did it. They finally did it. So, you know what? We can always hope for the future, can't we?
Yeah, exactly. All right, so I guess we're coming up on to 1 hour. I don't want to keep you any longer. I said, we're going to try to break this down into 2-3 different episodes. I guess Hidden Gems, it's so interesting. There's so many stories to tell there, so I don't want to take away from that book because I feel like we can have a full conversation just on that. And then once the third book is out, I can't wait to read it, honestly. I read both books in less than 48 hours, honestly. Yeah, so.
I was always amazed you said you'd read it, and I couldn't believe it. Nobody else had read it at all. I think there was 10. So you don't know this, Richard, but there were 10 copies, right? And you got one of the 10 copies. I sort of had to think, who's going to get the 10 copies? Adrian got one, and you got one, and there were like 8 others. And then he said, I've read it. I said, how the hell has he read it over Christmas time there? And I realized you had. That was the thing. So, congrats to the first person ever to read the 2 books. The third one, you'll be pleased to know, got printed today. And for those that are waiting, my readers are really patient. I'm amazed. I'm hoping that they're going to start making the 3-book set next week. It is a hand-finished book. It's not a cheap book, but it's a beautiful series of books. So I'm hoping that all 3 books, we'll have them in our hands over here in the US probably in 2 to 3 weeks. So I'll get you a set and we can talk through them all again.
And for those who are listening or watching, how would they go about getting your books?
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah. I'm a terrible salesman too. So it's very easy. We sell them direct, by the way, not through Amazon, just because otherwise the price gets hugely crazy. So it's just my name, stevesaxty.com, SAXTY. And you just go to my page and you'll find the books there. And it's easy enough. stevesaxty.com, and you'll find it easy enough.
Do you recommend all 3 books or just one of them?
Well, I'm really honest. So I always say to people,
you got to sell it harder than that. The books are really good.
Well, people say I'm English, remember. I always say to people, look, the best value has to be in buying the cheapest, but the best is always the one that's had the most love and most care. And all I can tell you is 75% of sales are a 3-book set. BMW got their prototype. I haven't even seen it. They're beyond excited this week. My printer rang me up, something they've never done before. And they said, Steve, you've got to raise the price of this. And they never tell me these things. So I have to tell you, I'm so excited about the 3-book set because it's so cool. It's not just 3 books. I mean, it's got a print set in there. It's signed and numbered. It's got this beautiful slip case. It's all wonderful orange. I know which one I'd go for because it's really cool, actually. And at the price, it's really good value, dare I say. So, that's as good as a salesman I'll ever be.
That sounds good. I mean, honestly, they really are good. I recommended the books, to some of my friends. I mean, aside from, having them on the website and social media, but I've told my friends, if there's one book that you should buy, you should definitely buy this one because it's not just, like you said, the past of the brand, but it's also the current, and the future of the brand. And a lot of us are younger, so maybe we don't know all the stories from the 70s and 80s, but we definitely know the 90s, like in 2000s, and a lot of the things in the book, speak to us. So that's why I found it extremely fascinating. So I was telling my friends, even from BMW, I'm like, you gotta buy the book because you will learn more about the company that you probably learn from your day job.
Oh, I know. Yeah. All the BMW people chase me. It's like, where's the employee discount? So yeah, I
get the same question. Yeah. That's amazing.
But it was honestly one of those things where I felt it was a magical experience to be trusted by a company that was going to give me the opportunity to tell their story in a way that nobody's ever been allowed access to the design archives. Nobody's ever been in. Nobody's ever been able to just have free range talk and sit with the designers as I did without, I mean, for hours and hours in Munich, to be inside the fits. You know, people just don't go inside the fits. It's been a magical experience, and I really, really, really fell for BMW in my heart and soul because they trusted me and I trust them. It's been a really wonderful experience. I'm so glad to have done it, and I'm just delighted if people like it, I suppose.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So there you go. So in case you're listening to this podcast, feel free to go to our YouTube channel. We're going to show some things from the book, some printouts and some sketches, and also you can see what we talked about here. I was showing some books also. Then of course we'll include the link to Steve's website in the description. And I guess I'm looking forward to the next chat already. So I just want to thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. You're very patient with all my questions via email as well, trying to learn more.
Thank you. It's been fun. I appreciate you guys being so.
No, it was great. I mean, honestly, the background story is also that I reached out to you even more recently. I said, are there any more interesting things in the book that maybe I should talk about? Because maybe I missed it because I was just reading through it so fast and trying to assimilate everything quickly. But so I appreciate it as well. And hopefully we can, help you with the next book too. But it was a pleasure, really, Steve.
The next book I'll be starting in a few months, but that's another time. Let's get this one finished first.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much, Steve. We look forward to seeing you next time. Nate, always a pleasure. And we'll see you guys the next time.
Yeah.
Bye for now.
Thanks so much, guys.